Then there's also a possibility that you could cultivate a posture on the other side, which is too relaxed, in which you don't have enough tension, right? And what happens, George? You just lean back in the chair, and what happens next?
I think I fell asleep.
Yeah. So the Buddha always referred to it as like the strings of a lute, neither too tight nor too loose, and this is exactly what he was referring to. Not falling into discursive thoughts and emotions, and also not falling into dullness and drowsiness and outright lethargy, sleepiness. Fair enough? So posture has a lot to do with that. Obviously, if you know what posture you go to sleep in, or you attempt to fall asleep in that posture, right? So that's too relaxed, and then trying to sit like Rose because you believe that that's the right ritualized form I should be sitting in if I were a real practitioner, right? If I were a real yogi or yogini, right, I'd be sitting like Rose. Or perhaps it would help if I were born Asian. Right? People who clearly came out of the womb in full lotus. All right. But you're American, or you've been living here long enough, right? And we grow up sitting in chairs, which makes sitting on a floor very, very painful for most people in terms of their hips. Fair enough? So continue sitting in a chair. You can become enlightened sitting in a chair. Can you imagine that's the holdback? I would have become enlightened, but this chair thing. All right. So anyway, let's kind of ease up around that. Now, the next thing about the relaxation response is cultivating purposefully a deep breathing in and a deep breathing out. Questions, thoughts about anything so far? Posture, cultivating the relaxation response, what the function is, scientific efficacy for a relaxation response, so you don't have to believe me or trust me in any way, which is not helpful here. If you'd like that, you can simply go to Massachusetts General Hospital. This is Harvard University's hospital, and you can go and look up Dr. Kabat-Zinn's work. And it's about every 3 months a new study is up about the efficacy of this. And it's very important, I think, that you have some sort of rational or perhaps even scientific, for many of you, some of you know, but for many of you to have some sort of scientific or at least tested hypothesis to see if you're going to be putting all this time in, you should definitely have some way of being able to acknowledge that this is probably going to be successful. If you're going to be putting all this time and effort into this, right? Otherwise, it's about trusting me, which I would say to that, right? That's not going to help you at all. It needs to be that you know what the results are for everyone else who has sense faculties and a body and a brain, just like you. What happens to other people when they do this? Fair enough? Okay. Yes?
John Kabat-Zinn's first book was called
Full Catastrophe Living. Yeah. So, good stuff. Good stuff for Western people who, you don't need to go down a Buddhist route or anything like that. If you would like to do that, that's certainly fine as well. They're speaking to exactly the same thing. So, but certainly, some of these books that we're talking about, Full Catastrophe Living or the Relaxation Response, those are titles that people are always asking me, just consider for a second, from a Buddhist point of view. The whole idea is to help other people to stop suffering and to have less stress. People always ask, what's the aim of that practice? And the aim is very simple. And it's the aim of the mindfulness practitioner to reduce and to finally remove stress altogether. That's a huge aim. That's certainly a worthy goal, no? Fair enough? Okay. So you have 1.5% of Americans who would ascribe to being Buddhist, right? Most of those, if you're probably thinking, religion's growing. No, just more people from Asia are moving here. So if you hang around these circles, you can really get the wrong view pretty quickly and think this thing's growing by leaps and bounds. It's not. It's actually not. Most people who are Buddhists in this country are not Caucasian and not Latino either. They're from, take a stab. Yeah, mostly from China, mostly from Japan, mostly from Korea. And the kind of Buddhism they practice looks almost nothing like what you're practicing right now. And I don't know if you know that or not. There's very little meditation. It's mostly turned into what I think you would refer to as a religion. Fair enough? A lot of smokes and whistles and monks, and nothing wrong with that, but very, very different than what we're doing here, which is clearly also mindfulness practice. I mean, beyond a shadow of a doubt. So we want to help other people to reduce and finally break stress. And so we go around saying, Buddhist, Buddhist, Buddhist. Who's our audience that we're going to attract? Now, considering that most Caucasians who are interested in Buddhism already belong to a community, and we're not going to be attracting people who, as Buddhists, people who are coming from what background? Well, any other background. So the only potential remaining audience of people that we could help would be people who are interested in Buddhism but yet haven't found a community to practice with. How big's that audience? So what about that wish to help other people? How's that going? Not good. Right? So it's a wish for all beings as long as they're what? Like, yeah, like candles like me. Right? So why don't we step back and take a larger view about what the goal is, which is to help ourselves and help others to stop suffering. I would encourage you to perhaps, when you ask questions like, well, how can I get other people interested in this? Perhaps getting books like Herbert Benson's book or John Kabat-Zinn's book is probably a wise move. Fair enough? People who aren't pushing what? Buddhism. Fair enough? And that's no disrespect to Buddhism. In fact, that's actually very much respecting Buddhism, because what was the Buddha's message was what? To remove... Yeah. So this isn't anti-Buddhist. It may be anti-clerical. And that's a huge distinction. No?
Yes.
Okay. So thoughts or questions, observations about that? No disrespect here to any teachers of any lineage? Nothing like that. That's not what we're getting at. In fact, we're actually fulfilling what your Buddhist teachers, if that's where you're coming from, what they actually want. What they would want for everybody, no? The idea isn't to convert people to Buddhism, it's to convert people to not suffering. Agreed? Yeah? Okay. So, if anything gets in the way, like some of these images, let's get them out of the way. How's that? You like that? Okay. Now, let's go a little bit further, and after about 15 to 20 minutes, which, oddly enough, is the scientific efficacy of about 20 minutes a day, that'll start after about 6 to 8 weeks, that'll start reducing the size of your amygdala. That's it. That's 6 to 8 weeks. I don't personally agree with that time schedule for people who I do work with. I prefer somewhere between 40 minutes to an hour of cultivating a relaxation response and other things besides that. But that's I don't have any scientific efficacy for that. Okay? That's just my preference. And I've seen people who do that, my experience is they experience better results in terms of not suffering. Fair enough? Which means, when I say not suffering, maybe I should be more specific. Anxiety. In fact, if we were to do an anxiety score or a depression score, where we would experience at those levels a lesser number. The more that you practice, the lower the number goes on those scores. So if you're going to go see a psychotherapist, this is exactly what goes on. Is not too far down the line, if you're experiencing depression or anxiety, they'd want to know at what level are you experiencing fear, depression, anxiety, etc. Fair enough? And so that's called an anxiety or depression score. And so the more the people do this, we can watch those rates plummet. So because you're cultivating a non-reactive relationship to your thoughts and emotions. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah, so it should be just very precise and very reasonable. It might be helpful for some people to in fact have a shrine and to have pictures of their teachers, because it might cultivate an atmosphere, fair enough, an internal atmosphere for them to do better in. But for many people, that very same thing would what? Yeah. So it's not a matter of you must do these things. But if it helps you and assists you, That's fine. To cultivate an atmosphere, especially if you've become accustomed to it and it feels familiar to you and it feels agreeable to you, by all means. But don't get too ritualistic. Don't attach to any rituals would be my 2 cents. Okay?